We visited North Dakota Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center and Fort Mandan State Park in Washburn, North Dakota in the fall of 2019. If you would like to get notices when I post again, be sure to subscribe right here. Just click on that button. This shows the two places we'll visit, the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center, and then we'll drive down the road to the Fort Mandan Historic Site. First, we'll stop at the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center. It's basically a museum of the Lewis and Clark exploration and what they did in this area. Then we'll be going over to the Fort Mandan State Historic Site. We'll be visiting two sites while we're here, the Visitor Center and the replica fort. Lewis and Clark were here from November the 2nd, 1804 to April 7th, 1805. They built their fort here because there were 5 villages of the Mandan Indians here that they could trade with. This is where they met Charbonneau and his wife Sacagawea, who will join the expedition. We'd not originally intended to go to the North Dakota Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center, but we see it on the way out to Knife River and decide to look and see what it has, and it was really a good stop. Here we'll explore mainly the Lewis and Clark expedition. Lewis and Clark were leading a military expedition, and they had 31 other people with them, including 3 scientists and artists. First, we have Prince Maximilian of Weed. He was a naturalist. Then we had Carl Bodmer, who was an artist. And lastly, we had David Griedroppel, who was a taxidermist. We also brought along a Newfoundland retriever, Seaman. On May 1st, 1804, they left with a 55-foot keelboat. Clark stayed on the boat mainly, and Lewis explored on land a whole lot. In the winter of 1804, they arrived at Mandan. They had traveled over 600 miles, and these were the first Indian villages they had seen. The Hidatsa and the Mandan Indians had several villages along this area of the Missouri River. This is a painting of a typical village that they would have had. These were the Northern Plains Indians, and they built a fort here. This is where they first bump into Toussaint Bircheneau and his wife, Sacagawea. Or is that really her name?
Her name is Sacagawea. That's closest to how they phonetically recorded it.
Sacagawea.
Sacagawea.
Several months later, they leave Fort Mandan and they'll spend their next winter in the Pacific. Fort Mandan is important because this is where Lewis wrote most of the expedition report. This is where they did much of the ethnographic work. This is where they had a positive relation with the Indians, and this is where they picked up Sacagawea. And now let's go to Fort Mandan on the Missouri River. It is several miles from the Visitor Center, and there's a huge statue of Seaman. This is where Fort Mandan was, and these are the 5 villages. We'll go up to the Knife River villages in our next part of our trip. And now let's go explore Fort Mandan, at least this reconstruction.
Right to say that,
here we see the 2-story barracks where the main part of the party stayed. Moving around to the end, this is where the storage rooms were. Then the officers' quarters, the guides' quarters, the watch quarters.
He was kind of a romantic in some ways.
And obviously this is the gate. This is probably what it looked like during the winter. It was shaped like a triangle, and let's explore each of the areas. The section on the right was where the main party stayed. Each one of the rooms here is decorated as it might have been for various functions. And here's a recreation of one of the infantry soldiers. At the point was where they stored their goods. Pantry for fresh foods that they would have collected, and also their rum, and then a place to store their other goods they collected along the way. Much of this was sent back after the first winter. And these white boxes, this is gifts to give to the Indians. Each one was given to a different village. Here you can see some of the contents of those packages that were given out. American flags, medals of freedom, and other trinkets. Moving on around, we come to the officers' quarters, and this is where Lewis and Clark and their slave stayed. Next up is where the guides and other people like that stay. Next we come to the watch room where the sergeant at arms was quartered and where they kept most of the weapons. Well, actually, on the top end of the V is the blacksmith shop. This might have been one of the most important places for them, for the Indians brought in many of their things they had, and the blacksmiths fixed them, and thus they had a lot of contact with the Native Americans.
And this brings us to the end of our trip.